What's good, everybody? Pete here at Spawn Fly Fish. How many of you are ready for Tuna Town? If you're not ready, today's the day to get ready. So grab your vise, grab your tools. Let's tie some bugs. Alright, in the vise today, we have the very large, very sharp SA254 from Ahrex. This, size 1. For the bead, I've got the Spawn Super Bead. And this is a raw variant, but by all means, black would work, nickel would work, any of those would be great. So we're going to lock this thing into place with some lead-free 0.025. The number of wraps are not quite as important here. It's just to give myself enough that when I shove that into the back side of that bead here, it's going to hold. And that's really what we want, is that bead to not move. And one thing, this hook was designed in part with Spawn specifically for our football bead. This is not a football bead. So you'll notice when you put it up to the neck there, it's not going to go all the way up to the eye like the football bead does. Not a problem. As long as the bulk of that bead, the biggest portion, is still under the shank, no issues. This hook will still ride hook point up the way it was intended. So keep that in mind as you go forward. And just round over both those cut ends on that wire, jam it into the back of that bead as best you can, and we're ready to get going. Alright, so start some thread, whatever you have on hand in a grayish tone, dun, black, any of that would work. Today I'm working with gray. Got some gray 6/0, and this is Uni, but a 140 from Veevus would definitely get it done. Trim that out, as would any of the Semper flies in the equivalent 140, so keep that in mind. A couple passes here, we're just going to lock down all that weighted wire, and so I'll get those angled wraps and then follow it up with some straight on and lock everything down. Alright, so I've tied something similar to this in a baby bass color scheme, but now what we're tying today, of course, is the anchovy. And why anchovy? Well, because it's such an important food source offshore. And so today's fly, since I get seasick, will be sent with somebody going offshore, namely the person behind the camera. So this is kind of a collaborative type fly where I say, all right, Josh, how was fishing? Great. What would have made it just, a little better or different, whatever it might be. And through different conversations, of course, if you're paying attention, you'll pick up these little tidbits. And so anchovy, very important food source, great. Specifically today, since we're on the Pacific side of the world, we're going to tie something that's in between the northern anchovy and the silver side anchovy. So where you live might be a different coloration. By all means, put in the homework, dial that thing in to match the bait fish you're throwing to the species you're trying to catch. Alright, I've got some white bucktail here. I'm going to measure that roughly 1 hook length, transfer that measure, and so just get this started on top. And when I take my fingers away here, let's get it tied down as a tail. You'll see, there we go. It's not even. I'm not stacking these fibers. I want them left like this, uneven, so that it's much more realistic as it's traveling through the water. No even edges on the back of any of these bait fish in nature, so keep that in mind. Not everything has to be an exact straight cut. In fact, a lot of these things work better if they're not cut straight. So I want to wrap that up to where it meets the weighted wire, trim that out, try to get a little cleaner there, and then what we're trying to achieve with this is simply keeping an even underbody, so that when we add our other elements, all of this will flow and make sense. We'll have a proper taper and all that good stuff. Alright, so right now it looks like a clouser, or at least the beginnings of a clouser, and this is very similar to a clouser, but you'll see as we go here that it's not exactly a clouser. Not sure what to call this. I call it a bait fish. You call it what you want. Alright, so I've got a thread here. I'm making a loop. Now I'm going to bring my thread back and close this loop. So 1, 2, 3 times around, bring that back up, And now I have closed the loop. Why is that important? Well, if you don't close the loop and you start to wrap, some of that can come undone, and throughout the process of fishing, your fly will start to slide back and come undone. That's no bueno for anybody, especially the person trying to catch fish on that fly. So I'm filling today with this loop up with some Spawn Simi seal in white silver. And this is the regular cut, it's not mega. If you want a little bit beefier profile, by all means go with mega and add a little bit more fiber inside that noodle, or excuse me, that loop. Otherwise, just go with the standard like I have here. And I'm working with roughly a 4-inch section, since this is a pretty good size hook here. I want to get this all covered, but I don't want a big bulky body. So we're going to spin this up, I'll brush it, and I'll try to give you a glimpse of just how sparse this noodle or loop is. And it's pretty sparse, and that's on purpose. So when you look at an anchovy, be it a live specimen or pull one out of a can for all that matters, they're pretty small. They're not a big profile. They're definitely not like a shad that has this big profile, high vertical and all that. This is a pretty slick back, small bait fish, and so we're not going for anything crazy here. We don't want a lot of bulk. In fact, we want something that slicks down pretty well, and that's where this style of fly just really fits in well with these types of bait fish, because you can make them pretty thin, much like Thunder Creek style, anything like that, where you are definitely, as the tire, in control of just how sparse or how densely you're tying these flies. So you really can't blame the material, it's the person utilizing the material. Alright, so I'm going to tie off this loop here, get that tool out, and then just pull it back over itself and tie down again. And that thing's going nowhere. Alright, so brush time. And I got the CDC brush here. Awesome, awesome tool. Just any loose fibers, and now's the time to get those out of there, because they're going to come out anyway. So at least you can check your work, so to speak, and make sure everything looks proper for your finished product. Alright, so there we go. And we'll flip this back. Now we're going to be working upside down for the rest of this. Alright, so bunch more to add on here. What we're going to try to do is create this illusion of shimmer inside the fly. I don't want to go necessarily full silver side here. If I was going to, I'd have lateral scale, one big piece on each side. That's not what we're tying. We're tying something closer to that northern anchovy. So a lot of dark tones, and then that silver just seems to come out from the fly, not on the sides. So I've got some micro cut Mirage, which is amazing, amazing flash. It's an opal color, so it's just going to pick up everything around it and behave much like the true coloration of a natural bait fish. Alright, so I'm just coming right on top, and you can see here I'm going to split that around the hook point and then just kind of drag it down, and then I'll have all this goodness sitting in what will be the inside of this bait fish, and it'll look appropriate. Alright, so there, I'm not going to cut these just yet, I don't think, although I can here. Based off of your tail, I'm going to come in here, and we will have some more fibers that do come over to reach that tail. So I'm just going to kind of go even, but I'm going to cut at an odd angle so that none of those fibers are exactly the same. Call that good. I'm pretty happy with that cut. And there you can see we're already getting something that's going to definitely grab some attention. Alright, so our next element is going to be some more bucktail. This time I'm switching to a gray ghost color, and this is from Hareline. Amazing, amazing bucktails coming from Hareline, of course, as always. And keep in mind, I don't want a bunch of fiber here. I don't need a bunch of hair. We are trying to keep this thing pretty small profile and slicked. Hopefully at the end of this I'll remember to get this all wet and dip it in water for you guys. So coming in with our next color, so we're going to have this silvery white underbody coming up to that real flashy kind of midline, followed by a gradient now getting darker as we go toward the dorsal side. So I'm going to measure that to that back portion and just go ahead and tie that right on top. And at this point I'm going to check my coverage, and by simply pushing down on these fibers with my thumb, I'll get that to spread evenly and finish tying down. So I'm happy. Go ahead and cut all those butts out, like so. And if anything, as far as the difficulty factor here, it's going to be in getting used to tying this close to the head or bead of your fly and still feel comfortable about throwing in this many materials. But that's one sure way to make sure that you're not piling too much. Alright, so next element, we have some barred body wrap, and on this one I'm using the UV barred, or BPW2 for those of you who like the codes. And so all you can see here is just some UV. It's got some black barring, nothing real descript, and yet very fishy, very indicative of what you're going to find in a baitfish. I'm going to come right on top of that gray ghost, and this is going to break up that pattern even more, add some modeling. I'm missing a couple fibers here. Try that again. There we go. Get them all tied in, and all that's going to do, we're going to put that around that hook point, much like we did all these other fibers. And I'm going to undo a couple wraps and make sure this gets directly on top. I can see it's leaning toward one side for me. I'm not a fan. There we go. Now I can trim out these fibers. Good. And make sure they're around that hook point and bring everything down once again. So now we have bucktail for the tail. We've got a little bit of that flash come in with that gray ghost, and now we've got the body wrap on top. So now we'll progress to the next darker phase, which is just the regular gray bucktail. Once again, from Hareline. I'm going to get in there, get a nice chunk out, but not too big. Just enough to keep this color shift or color phase going as we move up the vertical side of this fly. And I am removing any of the shorter fibers from the butts here. Get that fluff out, and we're ready to come right on top. So again, measuring off the previous stacks, we're just going to keep going right on top of that. Make sure it's on top and get her tied in. I'm going to check my coverage, again using that thumbnail, press down, check both sides, good. Lock her in. Again, trim out all these butt ends. Beauty. So you can see how quickly this fly can get away, and if you start adding big chunks of material, it very quickly bulks up. So keep that in mind as you're going. Depending on what baitfish you are trying to emulate, doesn't take much. Alright, so now we got all that bucktail going the right way. So just to add a little bit more shimmer and a reflective quality to this anchovy so that it looks a little bit more realistic in the water as it's moving, if it's giving off those little glints of light and all that, refracting and reflecting, that's just an added trigger, an added bonus to help give you some confidence in that fly. I'm just restacking, and this is ice wing, or excuse me, yeah, ice wing, but it's gray. And I always want to say ice wing fiber, but it's just ice wing. And did have a call last week. Somebody was a little confused on the difference between ripple ice and ice wing. Ripple ice actually has a ripple cut shape, where ice wing is just straight on. So hopefully that helps somebody today. Alright, so I've got that gray ice wing, just veil it over the thread. One thing you want to do is make sure that it's directly on the top, because this is your dorsal coloration. And I'm going to get a rough idea of where I want to cut that. Go ahead and cut before I spread it out evenly over the hook point. and like so, and like we did with all the other materials thus far, just bring it down, and it'll catch a couple times here. That's all right, and then we'll get it all underneath there. At least get a semblance of an order. All right, so you can see we still have quite a bit of space up here, and that's a good thing. I'll show you why here in 2 seconds. We are ready for a whip finish. So let's get this thing done. 1, 2, let's go 5 on this one. Here's our first whip finish. I've got some traveling bucktail fibers that want to just hang on for dear life. And here's our second whip finish. At this point, by all means, go ahead and get in there with some cement. But we're not quite done, so forgive me, because we're going to finish this thing before we get into all the cement and that good stuff. A little pruning there, and we are ready for some eyes. So for today, I've got some spawn eyes. These are 6 millimeter, and the color is rainbow black. Whatever eyes you happen to have on hand, I would say will get the job done. Anchovy eyes are not huge by any means. I'm just going to put a drop of super glue on both sides of that finished tie off area that we left there, and then I'll apply these eyeballs. One thing to keep in mind, it takes a long time to let super glue dry properly, and it also takes a long time to play with resin. So I'm not going to bore you guys and sit here in resin. I don't have enough to talk about for that, unless you want to really go off topic, which I don't think is the case. So let me just put these eyes on. I'm going to match up where they sit and then give a little squeeze. And there you go. So there we have an anchovy, and I would say very close, or closer to the northern anchovy than anything else. And now let me grab a little dish of water. I'll get the majority of this fly wet, pop it back in the vise so that you can see what the true profile is going to look like. Alright, so let me pop this back in now. We got this pretty well moisturized, if you will, wetted down, and that's our finished anchovy. Of course, as that's in the water, that's going to slick it all the way back. And that's the coloration we're looking for right there. Light underbody, dark dorsal, slight grade as you go. Flash inside that as this moves and is fully saturated is going to give off just glints of light, much like a regular bait fish. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, drop a like, drop a subscribe, and we will see you guys on the water.